What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and we are back again for another Pauper video talking about another new card from Murders at Karlov Manor and what kind of decks it can fit in, what are the pros and cons of it, and also a new brew. So stick around to the end of the video for that. I will be going over a lot of my card choices for that and giving kind of a full rundown of that deck list. And if you like these kind of videos, if you could leave a like and hit that subscribe button, it really helps support the channel and I would appreciate it very much. And with that said, let's take a look at the card that we are going to be talking about today. Is Slime Against Humanity. For 2 generic mana and a green, you create a 0/0 green ooze creature token with trample. Put X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is 2 plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are oozes or are named Slime Against Humanity. A deck can have any number of cards named Slime Against Humanity. Yeah, it's one of those cards. So this card is pretty powerful, honestly. It's basically spawned an entirely new archetype, though it's probably not one you are going to see a ton of, because, well, we got to talk about the cons of this card, and I would say the biggest con of this card is the current market price for it. Last I checked, or at least as of recording this video, it was around $5 a piece. So you are looking at, somewhere around 50 or $60 just for the amount that you are going to want to have to build a deck based on this card, since most lists that I have been seeing have been running somewhere between 16 and 18 copies of that. So that is a pretty big chunk of change just to invest in one section of the deck. And there's a lot of really good decks out there that, you could probably build for the price of like one third of your deck here, not even a third of your deck. Uh, White Weenie, I think you can build for around $40, and it's a very competitive deck. But with this card, there is a bit of a price point on that. If this is the kind of card that interests you, I think you should invest into it because there's a lot of fun to be had with this card. I have played against this card recently in a local tournament, and it is definitely very powerful. The trample side of this makes it pretty hard to deal with. Not to mention, they are very big creatures, so if you are more on a red-based removal, it's going to be really hard for you to interact with. If you're on black, there's a lot more things that you can do. If you are playing blue, it's going to be a little bit easier for you. But if you are playing burn or red aggro, your lightning bolts, your galvanic blasts, they're not going to do a whole lot against the slime, since they're usually coming out as a 5/5, usually on turn 3. Uh, Sometimes they don't get quite up to that scale, but most of the time it's probably going to be a 5/5, which has historically been hard for red players to deal with. So that's kind of the con and a little bit of the pros of it. So it's definitely a very powerful card. But and it's doesn't really seem to fit into other decks, really, because it is kind of a deck of its own. And I have seen a bunch of variation on this card. I have seen, a Simic version. I myself, even at one point, was trying to brew up a mono green version that used a lot of land destruction. I've seen a Gruul version or a red green version that seemed to be very explosive and also had some nice interaction with like sweepers and the like. Um, Me personally, I think the Simic version is probably going to be the best. And maybe there is a way to build a three-color version, but I feel like with how slow the deck can kind of be to sort of start things up and build momentum, going into three colors is probably not a very good idea because it's just going to slow you down in Pauper. It's going to slow you down quite a bit. And the deck we got today is the Simic version. I had, like I was kind of saying earlier, I had recently just played against probably I'm thinking it was a very similar list. I never got the exact list from my opponent or really got to take completely a complete look at the deck they were running. I think they were probably running something very similar to what we have here, and it was, it was very hard to deal with. I was on Pinger Burn, and I did end up winning the match, though it was definitely if I hadn't won that turn, I would have lost the next turn with the amount of power that they had on the board. And, with Pinkerburn, you're not really running a lot of creatures, so there's not a whole lot you can do when you have like 8/8s and 9/9s with trample swinging at you. Uh, so let's take a look at what we got here. We are on zero creatures, so we just got piles of sorceries, instants, and lands. So we got one copy of Deep Analysis, which is a way we can draw more cards. If we end up milling Deep Analysis, we can flash it back and draw some more cards. Helps fill up our hands. We got four copies of Foresight. And this card's pretty interesting. Basically, you get to search your library for any three cards, exile them, and then it also lets you draw a card, so it's kind of replaces itself a little bit. So we can basically go grab our three slimes and exile them, and they still count for the number of +1/+1 counters that we can put on. So that's pretty great. Then I got four copies of Lorien Reveal. This helps us make sure we are fixing our mana, making our land drops. Uh, Also lets us draw cards late game if that's what we need to do. If we are kind of, for whatever reason, stalling out, um, lets us fill up our hand a little bit. And then we are running 16 copies of our namesake card of our Slime Against Humanities. I'm kind of going at I think 16 has got to be the bare minimum, but I wanted to kind of keep some other slots open for other interaction, which is definitely I think one of the bigger downsides of the card is that you have to devote so many slots to this card to make it worthwhile. So I wanted to keep some slots open for interaction because, you want to be able to counter their spells like their snaps or whatever, or their if they're bouncing things like Journey to Nowhere to just exile all your tokens. It's something you're gonna want to have to be able to interact with. So, yeah. And then we got four copies of counter spells to counter whatever things they're trying to do to get rid of our slimes or counter our counter slime against humanity. So we want to be able to interact with that. Then I got four copies of Frantic Inventory, another way to fill up our hand. And if we end up milling copies of Frantic Inventory, our when we do play our copy that's in our hand, we get to draw more cards since it counts the number of cards equals 1 plus the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in our graveyard. So that is always pretty nice. Then we got four copies of Mental Note. Basically lets us mill for two and draw a card. One copy of Moment's Peace, since I think one of the big issues with the deck is that you can kind of die to faster aggro decks. Obviously you get to drop some big beaters, but if you don't drop them in time, you could just be dead pretty quickly. Since you do tap out a lot and you have to hit that 3 mana in order to start playing your oozes. I got two copies of Spell Pierce, another way to help us interact with our opponent, and four copies of Thought Scour, which is basically just some redundancy of Mental Note. So it does the exact same thing. It's pretty great. We got one forest, 10 islands, one copy of Rimewood Falls, and four Tangled islets. So these are copies, or these are cards rather, that we can fetch with Lorien Revealed because they are typed. They are forest islands. They help us fix our mana. And the untapped islands, I'm running heavier on the islands. So we want to make sure we hit that 2 blue for our counter spell, or for hard casting Lorien Revealed, and making sure we are able to play those cards when we need to. Over in the sideboard, I got 4 copies of Blue Elemental Blast. This is to help fight against the red deck, since they can really make, if they're on to a very fast start, especially if it's burn, you can die pretty quickly before you're able to get enough damage through with your slimes. So we want to be able to interact with them. So that's where the blue blasts come in. Then we got 2 copies of Deglamor. This is where we can fight against boggles, or all the glitters types of decks. We can, return their enchantments or their artifact lands that they animated, their ginger brutes, whatever it might be. This lets us interact with them. 1 copy of Dispel, in case this we'll bring in if we know they're gonna be running instants. Um, and it's kind of a little bit better than our spell pierce at that point, since there is no cost that they can pay to keep their spell. Then we got 1 copy of Echoing Truth, which we can use against well, one, if we're up against a matchup of Slimes Against Humanity. I don't know how often that's going to happen, but Echoing Truth, we can basically wipe the board of all of their slimes while keeping all of our own. This also can do a lot of stuff against Koldatha Red, bouncing all their goblin tokens, so it's a bit of a sweeper against them, or against White Weenie if they have a bunch of bird tokens, etc. Very, very good card. Could bring this in against a few different matchups. And then one of my pet cards, Hoodwink. This is almost like a third copy of Deglamor. Is probably not quite as good as Deglamor. Actually, it's it's about, I would say it's about the same. Uh, you also can hit lands, I guess, but, and it is a blue mana, so and it's not as good as Boomerang, but it is a pet card of mine. We are on 2 colors, so we might not always have 2 blue available. We probably will, but just since we're on 2 colors, I am going with Hoodwink over Boomerang. But yeah, definitely very much a pet card of mine. Really, really love this card. So I always try and work in some pet cards just because I am that gamer. And we got 2 copies of Moment Piece. So we're bringing this in against more aggressive matchups to kind of stall them out so that we can get all our slimes out and hopefully take over the game. And then we got 4 copies of Relic of Progenitus. So we're going to bring this in against any deck that's playing out of their graveyard, against other decks that are playing, Tolarian Terrors, combo decks, all of those sorts of things. We're going to bring this in against them to kind of fight against that. Uh, but yeah, that is the deck, guys. So I'm really interested in what you guys think about Slime Against Humanity. So far, I've only really seen one deck in person, though it is rather new. So we'll see if some other people are going to brew it. Obviously, the price point on this deck is pretty high. Even if we took out the relics, we'd basically be taking out $20 of cards. Even if we decided to go with Tormod scripts, which you could save a little bit of money there, but for a pauper deck, this deck is almost running, it's over $180 for this deck right now, according to the prices on Moxfield. So that's a pretty good chunk of change for a pauper deck, which a lot of them are well under 100. More on the $60 to $70 range. I think is pretty average for pauper, unless you're playing with Lotus Petals or Artifact Lands and Dust to Dust has gotten pretty expensive. Snuff out those cards. Obviously, Relic. So the price point is pretty high to play this, which I think is going to price out a lot of players, because one of the big draws to this format is the fact that it is very affordable, though comparing this price point to other formats, it's still quite affordable depending on where you are at financially. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this card. Is this something you are interested in running or brewing with? Are you totally turned off by the price point? I would very much like to know what you think. As always, there's a deck list in the description, so feel free to check that out. I'm going to get out of here. I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.